She failed to arrive at work. She was a mother who worked in advertising. On the morning of May 2, 2001, in the quiet streets of Chevy Chase, Maryland, a routine day began to fracture. Her colleagues grew concerned. Her husband Carl Preer and co-workers stepped inside their Drummond Avenue home. What greeted them was unthinkable. Blood spatter marked the walls. A rug lay pushed aside. A table lay toppled. Leslie J. Preer, 50 years old, devoted mother, marketing professional, lay dead in the upstairs bathroom, her body partly in the shower stall, head marked by lacerations, her life extinguished by both blunt force and strangulation. No sign of forced entry. No clear motive. For more than 20 years, her death would remain a mystery. Nothing made sense. Nothing fit. The evidence collected that day, including DNA under Leslie's fingernails, would lie dormant for decades, waiting for advancement in science. Then, in 2022, the stalled case ignited once more. Investigators turned to forensic genetic genealogy. They built a family tree from unknown DNA. It led them to a name that seemed impossible. I've spent countless hours across archives, police statements, forensic reports, and interviews, piecing together every moment. Because this isn't just a crime story, it's the story of a daughter's decades-long search for answers. It's the story of a mother's life violently cut short. And it's a story that finally demands to be told in full. Stay with me, because nothing about this case was simple. And what we unearth has the power to challenge everything you thought you knew about trust, betrayal, and the power of justice. Leslie Jennings Preer was, at her core, a devoted mother, a respected marketing professional, and a woman loved in her community. At 50 years old, she had built a life rooted in trust, routine, and connection. And then, on one ordinary spring morning, everything shifted. A day that began like so many others ended in a way that no one could have anticipated. May 2, 2001. It was a Wednesday like any other in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Leslie Preer was supposed to be at her desk in downtown Washington, D.C. But on that morning, Leslie never arrived. The absence was immediate, unusual, and deeply unsettling. This was not a woman who missed work or failed to call in. Hours stretched, phone calls went unanswered. By late afternoon, unease had grown into something darker. Her husband, Cal, and close colleagues grew alarmed. Together, they entered the Drummond Avenue home, searching for answers. Upstairs, the quiet suburban normalcy shattered. A table overturned. A rug out of place. Blood on the walls. And in the bathroom, the nightmare no one was prepared to face. Leslie lay partly in the shower stall. She had been beaten and strangled. Investigators would later describe the scene as violent and deeply personal. It wasn't a random burglary gone wrong. It wasn't opportunistic. Whoever did this knew Leslie. And they had taken the time to try to cover their tracks. There was no sign of forced entry. Jewelry sat untouched. Her purse was still in place. The house had not been ransacked. And yet something had been taken. Her life. The quiet of the neighborhood was shattered when police and forensic units descended on the scene. Yellow tape stretched across the lawn, flashing lights bathed the night, and investigators worked tirelessly to preserve every shred of evidence. Detectives noted the violence wasn't random, it was deliberate and chilling. The body's position suggested staging or perhaps a struggle. Was the killer trying to mislead investigators? Or did they leave in haste, panicked? Officers noticed signs of blunt force trauma/possible strangulation. And as detectives examined the body, they noticed something small but vital. Under Leslie's fingernails, fragments of skin. A trace of DNA. Evidence of a struggle and the beginning of a trail that, though dormant for decades, would eventually lead to an unthinkable truth. When you hear stories like this, do you think investigators should always suspect someone close first, or is that an unfair assumption? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because in this case, the question of who was close would become far more complicated than anyone imagined. Police quickly realized they were not dealing with an intruder who disappeared into the night. They were dealing with someone who had crossed the threshold of Leslie's trust. Someone who had left more behind than they realized. But who was it? And why would they want her dead? The answers, at least at first, were nowhere to be found. Investigators know most homicides are committed by people close to the victim. Did a family member, a friend, or a partner know more than they admitted? The town was shaken. Fear spread quickly. If a killer could strike here, no one was safe. Investigators initially suspected Prier's husband, according to prosecutors. Police weren't able to match him to the male DNA blood samples found at the scene. Investigators went methodically. Door-to-door canvassing. Detectives began pulling phone records, questioning friends and acquaintances. Every alibi was cross-checked. The smallest inconsistency could mean everything. Detective collected forensics. Fibers, fingerprints, possible DNA samples. Even the smallest trace of a hair strand could unlock the mystery. As weeks turned into months, the unanswered questions about Leslie's final hours grew heavier. Who had she last spoken to? What secrets lay hidden in her circle? Detectives turned their attention to everyone in Leslie's orbit: co-workers, neighbors, past relationships, even strangers who might have crossed paths with her that night. Months turned to years. The investigation began to lose momentum, the trail growing colder by the day. Investigators were convinced they were circling the truth, but without hard evidence, the case was slipping through their grasp. Leslie's case began to gather dust on the shelves of the police department. Her loved ones refused to let her name fade. Police struggles behind the scene. The detectives were juggling Leslie's case with dozens of others. Some investigators were retiring, others newly assigned. Years later, DNA testing had improved. A hair, a fragment, something once considered useless might now hold the key. In 2022, with the case apparently at a dead end, investigators and prosecutors decided to take a swab of blood from the crime scene and send it off for what's known as forensic genetic genealogy DNA analysis. Forensic genealogy is a technique in which investigators use a known DNA sample to build a family tree of possible connections based on DNA profiles from publicly accessible genealogy websites. The evidence was sent to Othram Incorporated Labs in September 2022. A list of shared DNA matches was identified on the Family Tree DNA database, where the last name Gliger emerged. The killer wasn't a stranger. It was someone Leslie trusted. The match belonged to Eugene Theodore Gliger. By the time the DNA results came in, Gliger was living in Northwest D.C., police said. That name also turned up in the original case file that dated back to January 2002. It was in a tip from one of Gliger's neighbors who thought Lauren Prier's boyfriend may have been related to the homicide. Investigators had interviewed him briefly and dismissed him. He had dated Leslie's daughter Lauren when she was just 15. He was within arm's reach of the family. But investigators still did not know whether Gliger was the suspect. McCarthy said that while it's not definitive proof, the use of genealogical DNA offers a clue. Police put Gliger under surveillance. That took them to Dulles Airport on June 9, where they saw him throw away a water bottle he drank from. Investigators collected the water bottle and tested it. It matched the DNA profile from the bloody crime scene, according to court documents. Court documents also said that Gliger has never been arrested for any crimes in which his DNA would have been entered in the CODIS database, which holds DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence and missing persons. In June 2024, they arrested 45-year-old Eugene Gliger inside of Washington Dulles Airport. For the first time in state history, familial DNA was used to solve a cold case murder, according to Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy. We identified a distant relative who lived in Romania. With that information, they had to construct a family tree, McCarthy said. Once he was arrested based on that DNA result, we did a confirmatory test and again tested his DNA to assure ourselves that it was in fact Mr. Gliger's DNA. It wasn't until May 2025, nearly 8,800 days later, that Gliger stood before a judge and admitted his guilt. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The most damning piece of evidence in the case was the DNA that was under Ms. Prier's fingernails because she struggled with her attacker. "Never in a million years did we think that one of our people could hurt my mom like that," Lauren told NBC4 about her mother's killer. Lauren Prier, who was 24 at the time of the murder, said she never suspected Gliger. Lauren had run into Gliger at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. before his arrest under normal pretenses. He acted like nothing had happened. "I've spoken to him. He didn't seem weird, and how you could look someone in the eye and know that you committed this crime and act like nothing happened is pretty unreal," she said. When the case went to trial, the courtroom was packed. The prosecution unveiled evidence meticulously pieced together over years, digital footprints, DNA fragments, and testimony that painted a picture of obsession. Gliger was initially charged with first-degree murder and faced the potential of life in prison. But prosecutors later said there was no evidence to suggest the homicide was premeditated, which would be required for a first-degree murder conviction. Gliger pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in May 2025, which carries a maximum of 30 years in prison. A total of 7 family members, including Lauren, read victim impact statements during the hearing, which was held August 28, 2025. Gliger apologized and took responsibility for the murder, claiming he had been drinking alcohol and using cocaine at the time. "Leslie always was very kind to me," Gliger told the courtroom. Prior to his sentencing, Gliger addressed the court and Prier's family, expressing his regret tearfully. He claimed that in the days leading up to the killing, he had blackouts, and although he remembers entering Leslie Prier's home, he doesn't remember exactly what happened after that. No motive has been given for Prier's murder, but records indicate he was a mischievous high schooler and had some substance abuse issues. Gliger was sentenced Thursday, August 28, 2025 to 22 years in prison by a Montgomery County Circuit Court judge in Rockville. For Leslie's family, the guilty verdict brought a measure of relief, but not peace. Nothing could bring back their daughter, their sister, their friend. The courtroom wing could never fill the empty seat at the dinner table. Neighbors, too, were shaken. How could something so brutal happen in a place they thought was untouchable? In Chevy Chase, Maryland, the sense of safety was forever fractured. But through the grief, Leslie's memory endured. Friends described her as bright, driven, and endlessly kind. She was a woman with dreams, with laughter that filled every room she entered. Her legacy isn't the crime that ended her life, but the compassion and love she carried while she lived. Cases like Leslie's leave us with sobering questions. About trust. About safety. About how well we truly know the people closest to us. Her story shows how justice may be delayed, but with persistence and progress, it can still be delivered. And it's a reminder that the fight for answers must never stop. Leslie Prier's story is a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. That betrayal can come from the familiar, not just the unknown. And it's a call to remember her not as a victim, but as the vibrant, loving young woman she was. Her life deserves to be honored, her memory preserved. If you believe stories like Leslie's deserve to be told with care, please support this work with a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every theory, and your voices help keep these stories alive. And if you want to see more true crime documentaries researched in depth, subscribe, because next week, we'll cover another chilling case you won't want to miss.